Welcome to the official podcast of Geoparks WA, where we will be discussing all things geoparks. In our last episode, we were joined by Alan Briggs and Ross Dowling, who took us through the basics of geoparks. They will join us again for this episode, discussing how geoparks are formed and the processes behind achieving the final goal of UNESCO Global Geopark accreditation. To kick off this episode, let's hear from Alan as he takes us through the establishment of geoparks and what is involved to get one running.
Through Geoparks WA, we work with any local community that's looking towards establishing a local geopark. And often they say, well, what's required? And one of the first things that we've been advocating is that geotrails are established first as a way of introducing that to the local community and to the broader community as well. And it becomes a talking point. But when you're establishing geopark, it really needs to be driven by the local community, and they should work with the local government. And then as we progress from there, to start looking at other agencies and other stakeholders that are involved, particularly local businesses in tourism, to get their support. It's really having a steering committee in place to start off with, and then we work towards establishing a board. That board then becomes the formal leading group for a local geopark, and having them in place, then we look towards incorporation. And once they're incorporated as a geopark, such as Binjarra, Western Australia Geopark in the Peel region, we can then move forward with formal naming, branding, and more liaison with the local community. And we really do need to get out there and talk to local communities through the shires, get the shires or the local government authorities involved, so that they are involved in setting up the groups, because they have the networks, that we can then go and address and inform them about the geoparks and the values and benefits that come from having a geopark in place. Once we have the local geopark, that's a capital L, local geopark now. It's a geopark that's been established by the local community, driven by the local community. We can then look towards getting some accreditation in place. That's where Geoparks WA and the Australian Geoparks Network come in to provide further support for those local geoparks. And then there's the formal process of lodging a letter of intent through to UNESCO. And at that stage, we're looking at having federal government support. So that's another process that Geoparks WA and the Australian Geoparks Network are involved in. We will then be looking at completing a 101-step checklist and preparing a dossier that's a 50-page dossier that's then submitted to UNESCO. UNESCO then take it on board, and they also have a step-by-step process, so it's a timely process. And eventually, if everything's fine, it gets launched at one of the Global UNESCO Geopark conferences, and it will become a UNESCO Global Geopark for 4 years, but only 4 years. So unlike World Heritage Areas and Biosphere Reserves, UNESCO Global Geoparks are reassessed every 4 years. And it's like a soccer football code where you green, orange, red. And if you're doing the right thing, you get a green card and you're renewed. The yellow card really is the assessors will let you know what's needed to lift the geopark up to the right standard again. And red card means you're disqualified for a period of time, but you can relodge. So all these processes come together, and we, Professor Ross Dowling and I, have to keep an eye on that and, again, work with the different local communities to achieve the ultimate goal, UNESCO Global Geopark in Australia.
So, Alan, you mentioned there that geoparks were a network, and it's worth noting that the group of geologists who first started geoparks way back a long time ago, 50 years ago, they actually formed a Geoparks Network, and that exists today. It's called the Global Geoparks Network. So that is a not-for-profit voluntary organisation that works alongside UNESCO. So every geopark really is asked to become a member of the Global Geoparks Network. And there are a number of sub-regional networks like the Asia-Pacific Geoparks Network, the European Geoparks Network, the African Geoparks Network, etc. And we here in Australia are part of the Asia-Pacific Geoparks Network, which actually has the most geoparks across that region in the world. So being part of a network, one of the things that you have to do if you become a UNESCO Global Geopark is you have to network with other geoparks. You're cross-promoting. So you're part of a big family. And so, you know, it means that if you're in Iceland or if you're in Japan or if you're in Spain, you are recognising the geoparks in Australia when they get up. And they will be, you know, pointing towards us, and they'll be probably coming out here to look at what we are doing and give advice and inviting us back to their geoparks. So you're part of a family network, and that's best displayed at the global and regional conferences. There you can actually see it's like a family in practice. Everyone's there trying to help each other. There's no ego in geoparks. Communities are not trying to do better than others. Geoparks are not there saying we're the best. You never hear that. They're there saying how can we help you achieve that status and be the best geopark you can be.
As a sequel to Ross's comments then, while I was at the Chilean UNESCO Global Geoparks Conference in Temuco, while it was a great experience sharing and being part of the networking family, what was really interesting to me was a young lady who stood up from Oki Islands, and she was there to manage the geopark. And her example was not necessarily about the geology, but about how she got people working together under the geopark banner. Prior to her success there were 4 islands and 4 resorts, and following on from COVID, each one was competing with the other, and tourists weren't coming. They just could not get them to come. When she got involved, she drew them together, had a meeting with them, and said, let's work together. And so they did, and they're spending less money on marketing, but collectively spending more at a target audience. And the tourism figures are now increasing significantly. So that really shows that working under the brand of a geopark does work.
Clearly, geoparks have the ability to make great global impact and strengthen communities. As Alan has mentioned, there are many geoparks around the world. But what are the different levels of geopark, and how could we progress from a local level to a geopark of international significance?
One of the things we're often asked is, what are the levels of geoparks? How do we get to become a UNESCO Global Geopark? In Western Australia, we've introduced the local geopark driven by a local community, but there can also be regional and state geoparks. Our aspiration is to have the state government approve a local geopark so it becomes a state geopark. And then we understand that the federal government acknowledge that the states manage the land resources, and hopefully they will endorse it as a national geopark. Once we get to a national geopark level, then we work with the local community to the local geopark to become an aspiring geopark to reach the UNESCO Global Geopark status. So that's the process that we've developed here and we follow through now. The approval process itself is, as a geopark, you're working with local stakeholders, be they government, not-for-profits, the local community, and the Geoparks WA will endorse a submission at its early stages, work with the local geopark to overcome any shortfalls that we might pick up there. That is then submitted to the AGN as a completed dossier and 101 checkpoint listing. The AGN will then work with the federal government and the federal representation of UNESCO to forward a letter for the aspiring geopark to enter that process with UNESCO.
So there is a clear process to follow that will help us to reach the goal of becoming a UNESCO Global Geopark, one that I am sure we will achieve. Thank you to Alan Briggs and Professor Ross Dowling for that overview of how geoparks are formed. We hope that you have learnt something new through this episode and that you will join us next time, where we will delve into the goal of establishing geoparks here in Western Australia. For more information, head to our website at australiangeoparksnetwork.org and follow our social media page at geoparkswa.